A judge was about to separate a boy from his grandmother until the family dog did something unbelievable in the courtroom. What the dog revealed turned the entire case upside down and left everyone in shock. Watch until the end and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapter of this real and heartfelt story. The rhythmic patter of rain against the wooden roof was the only sound breaking the persistent silence of Oak Ridge Heights, a forgotten corner of rural Vermont where time seemed to slow to a crawl. In a modest timber house perched at the top of a winding road, 11-year-old Elijah Walker sat cross-legged on the living room floor, surrounded by open textbooks on quantum physics and advanced mathematics, subjects that most adults spent decades trying to comprehend. The fragrant scent of pine and dampened earth drifted through the slightly open window, mingling with the comforting aroma of the vegetable soup simmering on the stove. Elijah's grandmother, Martha Walker, stirred the pot slowly, her once steady hands now trembling slightly with age. Though her health had been deteriorating over the past few months, her warm smile remained unwavering whenever she looked at her grandson. "Grandma, I think I've figured out this Schrödinger equation problem," Elijah called out, his voice carrying a maturity that belied his years. Professor Reynolds said no one in his undergraduate class could solve it, but there was a pattern in the variables that they must have missed. Martha chuckled softly. "That's wonderful, honey. Maybe you can explain it to me after dinner, though I can't promise I'll understand a word of it." As if on cue, a golden retriever with intelligent amber eyes trotted into the room, carrying Elijah's notebook in his mouth. The dog, whom Elijah had named Kepler after the famous astronomer, placed the notebook carefully beside the boy before settling down next to him with a contented sigh. "Good boy, Kepler," Elijah murmured, running his fingers through the dog's soft fur. "Always looking out for me, aren't you?" Kepler wasn't just a pet. He was Elijah's closest companion, a loyal friend who seemed to understand him in ways that even adults couldn't. Since his mother, Rebecca, had left town following a bitter divorce 3 years ago, Kepler had become Elijah's constant shadow, accompanying him to the library, on long walks along the abandoned railroad tracks that cut through the valley, and even to school meetings where his presence had become an accepted part of the routine. The locals had taken to calling Elijah the genius kid, not just for his extraordinary intellectual abilities, but also for his remarkable emotional intelligence and observational skills. He seemed to notice details that others overlooked, to see connections that remained invisible to the average person. Despite being offered opportunities to skip several grades or attend specialized schools for gifted children, Elijah had chosen to remain in Oak Ridge Heights with his grandmother, balancing his advanced studies with caring for the woman who had taken him in without hesitation when his mother moved to California to find herself. Martha placed 3 bowls on the table, 2 for humans and 1 for Kepler. "Dinner's ready, sweetie. Come on, give those books a rest for now." Their routine was simple but comforting. Dinner together at 6, followed by an hour of Elijah reading aloud from classic novels while Martha knitted, then an educational documentary that they would discuss afterward. Kepler would lie between them, his head resting on Elijah's lap, occasionally making sounds that almost seemed like contributions to their conversations. But tonight, their peaceful routine was interrupted by a firm knock on the door. Kepler immediately stood up, ears perked but not barking, a behavior Elijah had trained him to maintain. Martha's brow furrowed as she glanced at the old grandfather clock in the corner. They rarely received visitors, especially after 5 in the evening. "I'll get it, Grandma," Elijah said, already moving toward the door with Kepler following closely behind. Standing on their porch was a stern-looking man in a dark suit, clutching a leather portfolio. Rain dripped from his umbrella onto the welcome mat as he regarded Elijah with mild surprise. "Good evening," the man said, his voice professionally detached. "Is Martha Walker available?" Elijah nodded, stepping aside to let his grandmother approach. Something about the man's demeanor, the way his eyes darted around the house assessing, made Elijah instantly wary. "I'm Martha Walker," his grandmother said, her voice steadier than it had been all day. "Mrs. Walker, my name is Theodore Simmons. I'm a process server for the Vermont Family Court." He extracted an envelope from his portfolio. "You've been served with notice of a custody hearing regarding your grandson, Elijah Walker." Martha's hand trembled as she accepted the envelope. "Custody hearing? I don't understand." "The petitioner is one Richard Walker, who claims to be the boy's paternal uncle," Mr. Simmons continued, his tone mechanical. "The hearing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today. All the details are in the documents. Good evening." With that, he turned and walked back to his car, leaving Martha and Elijah standing in the doorway, the unsealed envelope between them like a ticking bomb. Kepler whined softly, pressing his body against Elijah's leg in a gesture of comfort. The boy placed his hand on the dog's head, drawing strength from the familiar touch as he guided his grandmother back to the living room. "Richard?" Martha whispered, sinking into her armchair. "I haven't heard from Richard in years. Not since." "Your father's?" She stopped herself, avoiding the painful topic of Elijah's father's passing. "Not for a very long time." Elijah carefully took the envelope and removed its contents, his quick mind already scanning the legal jargon with remarkable comprehension for someone his age. His uncle Richard, his late father's brother, was petitioning for guardianship on the grounds that Martha was physically incapable of providing adequate care for a minor child due to advancing age and declining health. Attached to the petition were medical assessments from doctors Elijah had never heard of, and statements from concerned professionals who claimed that Martha's condition put Elijah at risk. None of these people had ever set foot in their home. "This doesn't make sense," Elijah said, his analytical mind already spotting inconsistencies. "Uncle Richard lives in Burlington. He's never even visited us since Dad left. Why would he suddenly want custody now?" Martha's hands were shaking more violently now, and Elijah quickly moved to the kitchen to prepare her evening medication. As he filled a glass with water, he noticed Kepler staring out the window, his posture alert. Following the dog's gaze, Elijah spotted a black sedan parked down the road, its windows tinted. It hadn't been there earlier. A chill ran down his spine as he returned to his grandmother with her pills. There was something strange about the timing of this custody petition, something that didn't align with what he knew about his Uncle Richard, a man who had shown no interest in being part of their lives until now. "Don't worry, Grandma," Elijah said, his young voice steady with determination. "We're going to figure this out. They can't just take me away from you." Martha cupped his cheek with her weathered hand. "Oh, Elijah, you shouldn't have to deal with adult problems like this. You're just a boy." But they both knew he wasn't just any boy. His intelligence and perception had always set him apart, sometimes making him feel isolated from his peers, but uniquely equipped for challenges that would overwhelm most children his age. That night, after Martha had gone to bed, Elijah sat at his desk with Kepler lying at his feet. The custody documents were spread before him, and he was making careful notes in a fresh notebook, creating a timeline of events and highlighting discrepancies. The medical reports claimed evaluations on dates when he distinctly remembered his grandmother being home all day. The professional concerns cited behaviors he had never witnessed in their household. There was something deeply suspicious about the whole situation, and Elijah was determined to uncover the truth behind his uncle's sudden interest in gaining custody. As he worked through the night, Kepler occasionally lifted his head as if offering silent encouragement or perhaps sensing his young master's growing resolve. Outside, the rain continued its steady rhythm against the roof, but inside, the peaceful cadence of their life together had been disrupted. Elijah knew that the next few weeks would test him in ways that even the most complex mathematical equations never could. But unlike those equations, this problem involved the only home and family he had left, and he wasn't going to let anyone take that away without a fight. As dawn broke over the Vermont hills, casting the modest house in a gentle golden light, Elijah finally closed his notebook. He had formulated what he called his silent plan, a methodical approach to understanding the real motivations behind the custody battle and gathering evidence to counter the false claims against his grandmother. With Kepler as his faithful ally, he would uncover whatever secrets his uncle was hiding. The first step was information gathering, and Elijah knew exactly where to start. The local library had archives of town records, property documents, and local newspapers that might reveal connections or motives he couldn't yet see. His reputation as a young researcher working on advanced projects would give him cover for his investigations. "Come on, Kepler," he whispered, scratching behind the dog's ears. "We've got work to do. Grandma needs us, now more than ever." Kepler's intelligent eyes seemed to reflect understanding as he rose to his feet, ready to follow Elijah wherever this new challenge might lead them. Together, they watched the sunrise from the window of the hilltop house, Esisa, house that, unbeknownst to them, others had already set their sights on for reasons that had nothing to do with Elijah's welfare and everything to do with the changing fortunes of their forgotten corner of Vermont. The Oak Ridge Heights Public Library was housed in a Victorian building with high ceilings and tall windows that filled the space with natural light. Despite being small compared to city libraries, it held a special charm that Elijah had always appreciated. Today, however, he wasn't there to lose himself in theoretical physics or astronomy books. He had a more pressing purpose. "Good morning, Elijah." Ms. Patel, the head librarian, greeted him with a warm smile. Over the years, she had grown accustomed to the quiet boy with extraordinary interests who often spent entire Saturdays among the shelves. "And hello to you too, Kepler," she added, reaching down to pat the golden retriever. "Hi, Ms. Patel. I was wondering if I could access the town archives today. I'm doing research on local property history for a special project." The librarian raised an eyebrow but didn't question him further. Elijah's special projects were well known in the small community, and they often yielded fascinating results that even adults found impressive. "Of course, the archives are in the basement room. You know the way," she said, handing him a key. "Just remember to lock up when you're finished." With Kepler padding silently beside him, Elijah descended the creaking wooden stairs to the basement. The archives room smelled of old paper and wood polish, with row upon row of filing cabinets containing decades of local history. "Let's start with property records for our neighborhood," Elijah murmured to Kepler, who sat patiently beside him as he began pulling out drawers and folders. Hours passed as Elijah meticulously combed through documents, taking photographs with the small digital camera he'd borrowed from his science teacher, Mr. Harrison. Something caught his attention when he reached the records from 6 months ago. There had been several property transactions in the area surrounding their home, all purchased by different individuals, but with paperwork filed by the same law firm, Thornton, Wheeler, and Associates. "That's strange," Elijah whispered to Kepler. "Why would all these different buyers use the same law firm?" Digging deeper, he discovered something even more curious. An application for rezoning had been submitted for the entire Oak Ridge Heights district, proposing to change it from residential to mixed-use commercial. The application was currently pending approval from the county board and had been submitted by Burlington Development Partners, a company he'd never heard of before. Elijah carefully photographed these documents, his mind already connecting the dots. The custody case might not be about him at all. It could be about their property. As they left the library, Elijah noticed a sleek car parked across the street, the same black sedan he'd spotted near their house the previous evening. Kepler noticed it too, his posture stiffening slightly. "Act normal, Kepler," Elijah whispered, casually adjusting his backpack. "Someone's watching us." Back at home, Martha was having one of her better days. Her hands were steadier as she watered the potted herbs that lined the kitchen windowsill. When Elijah entered, he was relieved to see some color had returned to her cheeks. "How was the library, sweetie?" she asked, setting down her watering can. "Interesting," Elijah replied, carefully choosing his words. He didn't want to worry his grandmother with his suspicions yet. "Grandma, do you remember if Uncle Richard ever showed interest in real estate or property development?" Martha looked surprised by the question. "Well, now that you mention it, he was always talking about big opportunities and smart investments the few times he visited your father. But that was years ago. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," Elijah said casually. "I saw his name mentioned in an old business journal at the library." That night, while Martha watched her favorite quiz show, Elijah retreated to his room with Kepler and his laptop. A quick search revealed that Burlington Development Partners had been established just 8 months ago, with little information available about its ownership structure. The company's website featured glossy images of commercial developments and phrases like revitalizing forgotten communities and bringing economic opportunity to rural Vermont. "This is too much of a coincidence," Elijah told Kepler, who listened with his head tilted attentively. "First, Uncle Richard suddenly wants custody, and now I find out there's a development company interested in our neighborhood. Something's not right." The next day, Elijah decided to take a different approach. After school, instead of heading straight home, he asked his friend Tyler if he could borrow his bike. Tyler's father worked at the county clerk's office, and Tyler occasionally helped file papers after school for extra allowance money. "Hey, Tyler, do you think you could check something for me at your dad's office?" Elijah asked as they walked toward the bike rack. "It's for a science project I'm working on." Tyler, who had always been in awe of Elijah's intelligence despite being 2 years older, nodded eagerly. "Sure, what do you need?" "Could you find out who the owners of Burlington Development Partners are? It should be in the business registration files." "That's a weird science project," Tyler remarked, but agreed nonetheless. "I'll text you tomorrow if I find anything." Yee. With that potential lead in motion, Elijah cycled home with Kepler running alongside him. The route took them past the abandoned railroad tracks that had once connected Oak Ridge Heights to the main line. The area had been deserted for decades, but recent survey markers and stakes had appeared along the edges of the property, another sign that something was changing in their quiet community. When they arrived home, Elijah was surprised to see an unfamiliar car in their driveway. Martha was sitting in the living room with a woman in a tailored suit who introduced herself as Diane Maxwell, a social worker assigned to evaluate their living situation. "It's standard procedure in custody cases," Ms. Maxwell explained, her tone professional but not unkind. "I'll need to conduct several home visits and interviews over the next few weeks." Elijah observed her carefully as she asked Martha questions about their daily routine, her health management, and her ability to care for a child. Though the social worker maintained a neutral expression, Elijah noticed how she took note of the modest furnishings, the slightly peeling wallpaper in the hallway, and the old-fashioned heating system. "And Elijah," Ms. Maxwell turned to him, with a practiced smile, "how do you feel about living here with your grandmother?" I couldn't be happier," he replied honestly. "Grandma understands me better than anyone else ever has. She supports my interests and makes sure I have everything I need. This is my home." The social worker nodded, making notes in her file. "I understand you're quite exceptional academically. Don't you think you might benefit from the resources a guardian with more financial stability could provide? Perhaps specialized schools or advanced programs?" Elijah's eyes narrowed slightly. How did she know about his academic abilities? That information wasn't in any court filing he'd seen, and more importantly, her question seemed leading, designed to make him admit some disadvantage to living with Martha. My grandmother ensures I have access to all the educational resources I need, he responded carefully. So, the local library is excellent, and my teachers provide additional materials when I request them. I've been offered scholarships to several programs, but chose to remain here. Financial resources aren't everything, Ms. Maxwell. Something flickered in the social worker's eyes, surprise perhaps at being challenged by an 11-year-old. She quickly redirected her questions back to Martha, but Elijah remained vigilant, analyzing every word and reaction. After Ms. Maxwell left, promising to return next week, Elijah helped his grandmother prepare dinner. Martha seemed more fatigued than usual, the visit having drained her energy. "Did I do all right, Elijah?" she asked, her voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I was so nervous. I kept thinking she was judging every little thing." Elijah hugged her gently. "You were perfect, Grandma. Don't worry about her. We're going to be fine." But privately, he was concerned. Ms. Maxwell seemed to have arrived with preconceptions, and he suspected she might not be an impartial evaluator in this case. Her questions had felt too targeted, too designed to expose weaknesses rather than understand their situation objectively. That evening, Elijah received a text from Tyler. "Found something weird. Call me." Stepping onto the back porch, where Martha wouldn't overhear, Elijah called his friend, with Kepler standing guard nearby. "So, Burlington Development Partners is owned by Northeast Ventures LLC, Tyler explained. "And guess who owns that? Richard Walker and someone named Edgar Thornton. They're buying up properties all around your area." Elijah's heart raced. Edgar Thornton, presumably of Thornton, Wheeler and Associates, the law firm handling all those property transactions, and Richard Walker, his uncle. The connection was undeniable now. "Thanks, Tyler. You've been a huge help," Elijah said, his mind already racing ahead to what this meant. "No problem. Is everything okay? You sound worried." "Everything's fine," Elijah assured him, not ready to share the full story yet. "Just working through some complicated variables." After ending the call, Elijah sat on the porch steps with Kepler, scratching the dog behind his ears as he thought through the implications of what he'd learned. His uncle wasn't interested in gaining custody out of familial concern. He wanted their property for his development project, but proving that would be difficult, especially for a child whose testimony might not be taken seriously in court. "We need more evidence, Kepler," he whispered, "and we need to document everything that's happening." Over the next few days, Elijah began what he called his surveillance operation. He set up his old tablet to record all phone conversations on their landline. He documented every unusual vehicle that appeared in their neighborhood, and he began keeping a detailed journal of Martha's daily activities and health status, creating an objective record to counter any claims about her inability to care for him. Kepler became an essential part of this operation. Elijah had been training the intelligent dog since he was a puppy, teaching him commands beyond the usual sit and stay. Kepler could retrieve specific items, alert Elijah to visitors before they reached the door, and even carry messages to and from Martha when needed. Now these skills would serve a more serious purpose. One afternoon, when Elijah spotted the black sedan parked at the end of their street again, he attached his small camera to Kepler's collar and gave him a special command they had practiced many times as a game. "Kepler, scout," he whispered, pointing discreetly toward the car. The golden retriever trotted casually down the street, appearing to be nothing more than a neighborhood dog on an afternoon stroll. As he passed the sedan, the camera captured clear images of the two men inside, one of whom Elijah recognized from photographs as Edgar Thornton himself. What was the lawyer doing conducting personal surveillance on their home? When Kepler returned, Elijah retrieved the camera and reviewed the images. In one particularly revealing shot, Thornton was holding what appeared to be architectural drawings with the label Oak Ridge Heights Commercial Plaza clearly visible. The following weekend, Martha received an unexpected phone call. Elijah, who had been monitoring all their communications, listened carefully from the extension in his bedroom. "Hello, Martha. It's Richard. Richard Walker," the voice on the other end said. It had been years since Elijah had heard his uncle's voice, but he recognized the same self-important tone that had always irritated his father. "Richard," Martha's voice was cool but polite. "I suppose you're calling about the court case." "Yes, well, legal proceedings can be so unpleasant, can't they? I was thinking perhaps we could resolve this situation amicably without dragging things out in court." Elijah felt his pulse quicken. He pressed the record button on his tablet, capturing the conversation. "I'm listening," Martha said cautiously. "I have a proposal that might benefit everyone," Richard continued smoothly. "I've recently become involved in some exciting development, opportunities in Vermont. As it happens, properties in Oak Ridge Heights are becoming quite valuable, especially those with the kind of elevation and views that your place has." There was a pause, and Elijah could imagine his grandmother's expression hardening. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting, Richard? I'm merely pointing out that your house, charming as it is, might not be the most practical place for you and Elijah at this stage. It requires maintenance. The stairs must be difficult with your condition, and it's quite isolated. If you were to consider selling the property, I could ensure you receive a very generous offer, well above market value. With those funds, you could relocate to a lovely single-level home in a community better suited to both your needs, perhaps closer to medical facilities for you and better schools for Elijah." Martha's voice was ice when she responded. "And then, coincidentally, you would drop the custody petition. Well, if you were in more appropriate accommodations, there would hardly be grounds for concern about Elijah's living situation, would there?" Elijah held his breath, waiting for his grandmother's response. "My home is not for sale, Richard," Martha stated firmly, "and Elijah is not a bargaining chip. If you want to pursue this custody case, we'll see you in court." The line went silent for a moment before Richard spoke again, his voice losing its veneer of friendliness. "You're making a mistake, Martha. Think about what's best for the boy and for yourself. Your health isn't improving, and taking care of a child, especially one with Elijah's special requirements, is only going to become more difficult. Goodbye, Richard," Martha said simply and hung up the phone. Elijah quietly replaced the receiver on his extension, his mind racing. The call had confirmed his suspicions. This wasn't about his welfare at all. It was about the property. And now he had actual evidence of his uncle's true motivations. He found Martha in the kitchen, her hands gripping the counter as she stared out the window. Kepler was already by her side, his body pressed reassuringly against her leg. "I heard," Elijah said, softly. "He wants our house." Martha turned to him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Elijah. I never thought Richard would stoop so low, using you to try to get this property." She shook her head in disgust. Elijah hugged her. "You did the right thing, Grandma. And don't worry, I recorded the whole conversation. Now we have proof of what he's really after." Martha looked at him in surprise. "You recorded it? Elijah, that's a legitimate piece of evidence," he finished for her. "Vermont is a one-party consent state for recording conversations. I looked it up. As long as one person in the conversation knows it's being recorded, it's legal." A small smile broke through Martha's worried expression. "You really are something special, Elijah Walker." The next day, Elijah decided it was time to seek professional help. Using some of the money he'd saved from tutoring younger students in mathematics and science, he scheduled an appointment with Laura Chen, a family law attorney in the neighboring town who offered free initial consultations. You can't take Kepler into a law office, Martha protested as Elijah prepared to leave. Actually, I checked their website. They're pet-friendly, Elijah countered with a grin. The truth was, he felt more confident with Kepler beside him, and he suspected the dog's presence might make the attorney see him as more than just a child. Laura Chen's office was modern and welcoming, with large windows overlooking the town square. The attorney herself was younger than Elijah had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with a direct gaze and a no-nonsense manner that he appreciated immediately. "So, Elijah," she said after he'd explained the situation, "you believe your uncle is attempting to gain custody of you as leverage to acquire your grandmother's property for a development project." Her tone was neither dismissive nor patronizing. She was speaking to him as she would to any client. "Yes, and I have evidence," Elijah replied, setting his tablet on her desk. "I've documented unusual surveillance of our home, compiled property records showing my uncle's connection to a development company buying land in our area, and recorded a phone conversation where he explicitly offered to drop the custody case. If my grandmother sold the house..." Laura's eyebrows rose slightly as she reviewed the materials. Kepler sat attentively beside Elijah's chair, his intelligent eyes moving between the boy and the attorney. "This is remarkably thorough research," Laura commented. "Most adults wouldn't have been this methodical." "I have a logical mind," Elijah said simply, "and this matters more than any science project." Laura nodded, continuing to examine his documentation. "The recorded conversation is particularly compelling. However, family court judges tend to prioritize what they believe is in the best interest of the child, regardless of the petitioner's motives. Your uncle could argue that despite his interest in the property, you would still be better off in his care due to your grandmother's health concerns." "But that's not true," Elijah protested. "Grandma takes care of me perfectly well, and I help take care of her too. We're a team." Laura's expression softened. "I believe you, Elijah, but we need to convince the judge. Your uncle has submitted medical evaluations questioning your grandmother's ability to care for you. We need to counter those with current, accurate assessments from her actual doctors." "I've been thinking about that," Elijah said, reaching into his backpack for another folder. "These are Grandma's real medical records from the past year. With her permission, they show that while she does have some health issues, they're well managed and don't impair her ability to be my guardian. I've also documented our daily routine to demonstrate how we function successfully as a household." Kepler nudged Elijah's hand supportively as the attorney reviewed these additional materials. Laura looked increasingly impressed. "Elijah, I have to say, you've built the beginnings of a very strong case here. With your grandmother's permission, I'd like to represent you both in this matter." She hesitated, then added, "My standard rate is $200 per hour, but given the circumstances..." "We can pay your fee," Elijah interrupted. "Grandma has savings, and this is important. We don't want charity, just fair representation." Laura nodded, respecting his pride. "Very well. Let's discuss strategy." For the next hour, they outlined their approach for the upcoming hearing. Laura explained that while Elijah's evidence about his uncle's development plans was important, they needed to focus primarily on proving that remaining with Martha was in Elijah's best interest. "Your academic achievements will actually help us," Laura explained. "They demonstrate that your current living situation isn't hindering your development or education. In fact, you're thriving." As they prepared to leave, Laura knelt down to pet Kepler. "Remarkable dog you have here. So calm and attentive." "Kepler's been my best friend since Mom left," Elijah said, his hand resting on the golden retriever's head. "He understands things, you know. Sometimes I think he's smarter than most people." Laura smiled. "I believe it. Animals can be incredibly perceptive." She straightened up and handed Elijah her card. "Call me if anything new develops before our next meeting." On their way home, Elijah and Kepler took a detour past his uncle's house on the outskirts of town. Richard Walker had inherited the family home after Elijah's grandfather passed away, while Elijah's father had received the smaller property in Oak Ridge Heights. Richard had always resented this division, considering his portion inferior despite it being the larger property. The house was an imposing Victorian structure, well-maintained but lacking the warmth of Martha's home. As they walked past, Elijah noticed several expensive cars in the driveway and men in business attire entering the house. One of them was Edgar Thornton, the lawyer whose name appeared on the property transactions. "They're having some kind of meeting," Elijah whispered to Kepler. "I wish we could hear what they're saying." As if understanding, Kepler suddenly perked up and trotted toward a basement window that was cracked open slightly for ventilation. The dog positioned himself beneath it, seemingly enjoying the sun, but actually within earshot of voices drifting out. Elijah, catching on quickly, sat on the sidewalk nearby, pretending to retie his shoelace. He couldn't hear clearly from his position, but he caught fragments of conversation. "Timeline is critical. Old woman won't sell. Custody hearing will give us leverage. County board meeting next month. Investors getting impatient." After a few minutes, Elijah whistled softly and Kepler returned to his side. They continued their walk home, Elijah's mind working furiously to piece together what he'd overheard. There seemed to be time pressure involved. Something about a county board meeting next month. That must be when the rezoning application would be reviewed. At home, Elijah found Martha sitting on the porch with Ms. Maxwell, the social worker, who was conducting her second evaluation visit. The woman's expression was professionally neutral, as she asked Martha questions about her medical regimen and daily activities. "Ah, Elijah," Ms. Maxwell greeted him as he approached. "I was just asking your grandmother about your after-school supervision arrangements. She mentioned you often spend time at the library alone." "Not alone," Elijah corrected, gesturing to Kepler. "And Ms. Patel, the librarian, is always there if I need anything. Plus, I'm in constant contact with Grandma via text message." He pulled out his phone to demonstrate the frequent check-ins they exchanged throughout the day. Ms. Maxwell made a note. "And what about your social development? Do you have friends your own age? Participate in extracurricular activities?" "I tutor other students in math and science twice a week," Elijah replied. "I'm part of the chess club and the astronomy club. And yes, I have friends. Tyler Hamilton and Sophie Rodriguez are my closest friends at school." The social worker nodded, writing in her file. "Your grandmother mentioned some health challenges she's been facing. Does that worry you at all?" Elijah recognized the trap in the question. If he admitted concern, it could be used to suggest he was under emotional strain. If he showed no concern, he might appear callous or in denial. "My grandmother and I are honest with each other about her health," he responded carefully. "We've established systems to manage her condition effectively, and her doctors are very pleased with her progress. Of course, I care about her well-being just as she cares about mine. That's what families do. They face challenges together." Ms. Maxwell's pen paused and she studied Elijah with increased interest. "You're very articulate for your age." "Thank you," Elijah said simply, not elaborating further. He'd learned that adults sometimes grew uncomfortable when reminded too directly of his exceptional intelligence. After the social worker left, promising a final visit before the hearing, Elijah shared with Martha what he'd overheard at Uncle Richard's house. "It sounds like they're in a hurry to get this. Development project approved," he concluded. "The custody case is just a means to pressure you into selling." Martha sighed deeply, rocking gently in her porch swing. "You know, your father always said Richard was too fixated on money and status. Even as boys, Richard would scheme to get what he wanted, regardless of who got hurt in the process." She looked out at the view of rolling hills visible from their porch. "This land has been in our family for generations, Elijah. Your great-grandfather built this house with his own hands. I can't bear the thought of it being torn down for some shopping center." Elijah sat beside her on the swing. "It won't come to that, Grandma. Ms. Chen is going to help us fight this." That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. Despite his confident words to Martha, he was worried. His uncle had resources, connections, and the presumption of adult authority on his side. Even with all the evidence Elijah had gathered, would it be enough to convince a judge to see through the scheme? The day of the custody hearing arrived. With a sky so clear and blue, it seemed almost cruel in contrast to the tension Elijah felt. He had barely slept the night before, going over their evidence again and again, searching for any weaknesses that his uncle's lawyer might exploit. Martha's hands trembled slightly as she buttoned her best cardigan, a soft blue one that Elijah's mother had given her years ago. Seeing her struggle, Elijah gently took over the task. "You look perfect, Grandma," he assured her, smoothing down the collar. "Judge Wilson will see what I see, the best grandmother anyone could ask for." Martha cupped his face in her hands. "Whatever happens today, Elijah, I want you to know how proud I am of you, not just for your brilliant mind, but for your kind heart and brave spirit." Kepler whined softly from the doorway, already wearing the special vest that Laura Chen had obtained to designate him as an emotional support animal, allowing him to accompany them into the courtroom. "I think someone's eager to get going," Elijah said with a small smile, grateful for the dog's steadying presence. The county courthouse was an imposing brick building in the center of town, its steps worn smooth by generations of Vermonters seeking justice. As they approached, Elijah spotted his uncle Richard standing near the entrance with Edgar Thornton and another man in an expensive suit, presumably their lawyer. Richard was exactly as Elijah remembered him, tall and broad-shouldered like Elijah's father had been, but with none of the warmth in his eyes. When he spotted them, his expression flickered briefly with something that might have been guilt before hardening into determination. "Martha," he nodded stiffly. "Elijah, I trust you're both well." "As if you care," Elijah muttered, earning a warning squeeze on his shoulder from Martha. "We're fine, Richard," Martha replied coolly, "though I can't say I appreciate being dragged into court by family." Before Richard could respond, Laura Chen approached from her parked car, her confident stride and crisp pantsuit projecting professional competence. "Good morning, Mrs. Walker, Elijah." She greeted them warmly before turning to Richard with a distinctly cooler tone. "Mr. Walker, I believe we can proceed inside now." The courtroom was smaller than Elijah had imagined from television shows, with dark wood paneling and uncomfortable-looking benches. They took their seats at one table while Richard and his attorney sat at another. Ms. Maxwell was already present, reviewing her notes in the front row. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Eleanor Wilson," the bailiff announced, and everyone stood. As the judge entered, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and penetrating grey eyes that seemed to miss nothing. After the initial formalities, Richard's attorney, a slick-looking man named Bennett, presented their case first. His argument focused heavily on Martha's health issues, presenting them as far more debilitating than they actually were, and emphasizing Richard's financial stability and ability to provide superior opportunities for a child of Elijah's exceptional talents. Mrs. Walker, while clearly devoted to her grandson, simply lacks the physical stamina and financial resources to properly nurture a gifted child like Elijah, Bennett concluded smoothly. Mr. Walker can provide the specialized education, enrichment, activities, and stable environment that this extraordinary young man deserves. Elijah clenched his fists under the table as he listened to the distortions and half-truths. Kepler, sensing his distress, pressed closer against his leg in silent support. When it was their turn, Laura Chen approached the matter differently. Rather than immediately attacking Richard's motives, she focused first on establishing the strength of Elijah and Martha's family unit. Your Honor, the bond between Elijah Walker and his grandmother is exactly what every child needs, based on love, mutual respect, and genuine understanding, she began. Mrs. Walker has created an environment where Elijah's exceptional mind has flourished, as evidenced by his remarkable academic achievements. She presented affidavits from Elijah's teachers and principal, all attesting to his outstanding performance and well-adjusted social behavior. Laura then addressed the health concerns directly, presenting statements from Martha's actual physicians that contradicted the assessments Richard had submitted. Mrs. Walker's medical conditions are well managed and stable, presenting no impediment to her guardianship responsibilities. In fact, her doctors note that the meaningful relationship with her grandson has positively impacted her health and overall well-being. Judge Wilson listened attentively, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but giving no indication of which way she was leaning. When Laura mentioned Martha's reluctance to sell her property despite generous offers, the judge's eyebrow raised slightly. "Is the property in question relevant to this custody matter, Ms. Chen?" she asked. "We believe it is central to understanding the petitioner's true motivations, Your Honor," Laura replied, and then laid out the connection between Richard Walker and Burlington Development Partners, including the evidence Elijah had gathered about the rezoning application and development plans. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat as Laura played the recording of his phone call to Martha, where he explicitly linked dropping the custody petition to her selling the property. Edgar Thornton, sitting in the gallery, visibly paled. "Your Honor," Bennett objected, rising to his feet, "this is a custody hearing, not a property dispute. Mr. Walker's business interests, whatever they may be, have no bearing on his suitability as a guardian. On the contrary," Laura countered, "they speak directly to his motivation in seeking custody. This isn't about Elijah's welfare. It's about leveraging a vulnerable child and his grandmother for financial gain." Judge Wilson held up her hand. "I'll determine what's relevant, counselors." She turned to Richard. "Mr. Walker, do you wish to respond to these allegations?" Richard stood, straightening his tie nervously. "Your Honor, while I do have business interests in Oak Ridge Heights, my primary concern is for my nephew. My brother would have wanted his son to have every advantage in life, which I am in a position to provide. And yet, you've had minimal contact with Elijah since your brother's passing," Laura pointed out. "No birthday cards, no holiday visits, not even a phone call until this property development opportunity arose." Judge Wilson studied Richard with narrowed eyes. "Indeed, Mr. Walker, your sudden interest in your nephew's welfare does coincide rather conveniently with your business ventures in the area." "I'd like to speak, Your Honor," Elijah said suddenly, standing up despite Laura's cautioning hand on his arm. The judge looked surprised but nodded. "Very well, Elijah. This proceeding does concern your future after all." Elijah moved to the front of the courtroom, Kepler faithfully at his side. He stood tall, his young voice clear and steady as he addressed the court. "Your Honor, my uncle claims to be concerned about my welfare, but in the 3 years since my father's passing, he has made no effort to be part of my life. He doesn't know my favorite subjects in school, or that I want to be an astrophysicist someday, or that Kepler helps me when I feel overwhelmed by too many ideas in my head." Elijah turned slightly to look at his uncle. "He sees my intelligence as something to be leveraged, just like he sees our home as a business opportunity. But Grandma sees me, the whole me. She understands that sometimes I need quiet to think, and sometimes I need to talk through complex problems out loud. She knows when to push me and when to let me find my own way." He reached down to touch Kepler's head. "My dog has shown more loyalty and genuine care for me than my uncle ever has. Kepler has been by my side through every difficulty. When kids at school didn't understand me, when I missed my mom, when I struggled with mathematical concepts that even my teachers couldn't help with. Would my uncle allow Kepler to live with us in his perfectly manicured home? Would he understand why I need to walk along the old railroad tracks to clear my mind? Would he sit and listen to me explain the fundamental theories of quantum mechanics? For hours, like Grandma does, even when she doesn't understand every word. The courtroom was completely silent now, every person captivated by the eloquence and emotional honesty of this extraordinary child. But this isn't just about what you want, Elijah continued. It's about right and wrong. My uncle is trying to use me as a pawn to pressure my grandmother into selling our home, a home that's been in our family for generations. That's why I decided to investigate. At this point, Elijah revealed the extent of his silent plan, explaining how he had methodically gathered evidence, from property records to overheard conversations to the surveillance photographs taken with Kepler's help. Then, reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small USB drive. And there's something else, Your Honor. Something I discovered just yesterday. Laura looked surprised. This wasn't part of their prepared presentation. With the court's permission, Elijah said formally, I'd like to present one final piece of evidence. Judge Wilson, clearly intrigued, nodded her consent. The bailiff took the USB drive and connected it to the courtroom's computer system, bringing the display up on a screen visible to everyone. 2 days ago, Uncle Richard visited our house. While Grandma was at her doctor's appointment, Elijah explained. I was supposed to be at school, but I had stayed home to organize our evidence. When I heard his car in the driveway, I hid upstairs with Kepler. Uncle Richard used a key he must have copied years ago and entered our house illegally. I recorded what happened next on my tablet. The video began playing, showing Richard Walker and Edgar Thornton entering Martha's home and beginning to search. Through her desk, their voices were clearly audible. We need to find those medical records, Thornton was saying. If she has documentation from her real doctors contradicting our experts, we need to know what we're up against. This whole situation is getting out of hand, Richard replied, rifling through papers. The rezoning vote is in 2 weeks, and the investors are breathing down my neck. If we don't secure this property, the entire development plan falls apart. It's the literal keystone of the whole project. Then make her a better offer, Thornton suggested. Richard slammed a drawer shut in frustration. I've tried. She won't sell at any price, says it's about family legacy and promises to my father, and now she's hired Chen, who's no pushover. If that boy testifies about how happy he is here, with his perfect granny and his damn dog, then we need to make sure that doesn't happen, Thornton said quietly. The medical testimony should be enough to create doubt about her competence. Once you have temporary custody, you can enroll the boy in that boarding school in New Hampshire we discussed. By the time any appeal goes through, the property will be sold, the development underway, and it will be a fait accompli. The video continued for another minute, showing the men searching the house before leaving empty-handed, having failed to find the medical records that Martha had already provided to Laura Chen. When the screen went dark, the courtroom remained silent. For several seconds, Judge Wilson's expression had hardened into something formidable. Richard Walker sat ashen-faced beside his attorney, who was already scribbling notes frantically, presumably preparing some kind of damage control. Your Honor, Bennett began, this recording was clearly obtained without my client's knowledge or consent. Vermont is a one-party consent state for recordings, Elijah interjected calmly. However, in this case, no consent was needed at all because there is no expectation of privacy during the commission of a crime, which breaking and entering certainly is. Bennett faltered, clearly unprepared to argue law with an 11-year-old, and even more unprepared for the child to be correct. Judge Wilson tapped her gavel once. I've heard enough. I'll take a brief recess to consider my ruling. Court, "We'll resume in 30 minutes." She fixed Richard with a stern glare before adding, "Mr. Walker, I suggest you remain in the building." During the recess, Elijah sat quietly with Martha and Laura in a consultation room. Kepler rested his head on Elijah's lap, offering silent comfort. "Elijah, why didn't you tell me about the break-in?" Martha asked, her voice shaking slightly. "I didn't want to worry you, Grandma, and I needed to make sure the video was clear, enough to be useful in court." Laura shook her head, an expression of bewildered admiration on her face. "You continue to astonish me, Elijah, though I wish you'd shared this with me beforehand." She hesitated, then asked, "Is there anything else I should know before we go back in there?" Elijah thought for a moment, then nodded. "Actually, yes. I've been doing some research on Judge Wilson. Did you know she grew up in Oak Ridge Heights? Her family had to sell their farm 30 years ago when a different development company pressured them. I think that's why she seemed so interested when you mentioned the property connection." Laura stared at him. "How did you even find that out?" "County Historical Society archives." Elijah shrugged. "I like to be thorough." When court resumed, Judge Wilson wasted no time in delivering her ruling. "Having reviewed all evidence and testimony presented, I find the petition for change of custody to be without merit and dismiss it accordingly. Mrs. Walker shall retain full guardianship of Elijah Walker." Relief flooded through Elijah, so intense that he momentarily felt dizzy. Martha clasped his hand tightly, tears of joy filling her eyes. But Judge Wilson wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into potential charges of breaking and entering, attempted coercion, and filing fraudulent documents with the court. Mr. Walker and Mr. Thornton, I suggest you retain criminal defense counsel." She looked directly at Elijah then, her stern expression softening slightly. "Young man, your intelligence is indeed remarkable, but it's your courage, loyalty, and sense of justice that truly impress this court. Your grandmother is fortunate to have you, just as you are fortunate to have her." As they left the courtroom, Richard attempted to approach them, his face a mixture of anger and desperation. "Martha, you need to listen to reason. That property is not for sale," Martha finished firmly. "Not now, not ever. And Richard, don't ever come near my grandson again." Outside on the courthouse steps, the local newspaper reporter who had been covering the hearing approached them for comment. Laura handled the media inquiries professionally, while Elijah and Martha stood beside her, Kepler maintaining a protective position between them and the crowd of curious onlookers. "Mrs. Walker, how do you feel about the judge's decision?" the reporter asked. Martha smiled, wrapping an arm around Elijah's shoulders. "I feel grateful for justice, and even more grateful for this extraordinary boy who fought so hard for our home and our family." "And Elijah," the reporter turned to him, clearly fascinated by the child who had uncovered a real estate conspiracy. "What are you going to do now?" Elijah thought for a moment, his hand resting on Kepler's head. "Go home. Help Grandma with a dinner. Maybe work on that new theory about black holes I've been developing." He smiled up at Martha. "Just normal things. Together." In the weeks that followed, their life gradually returned to its peaceful rhythm. Richard and Edgar Thornton both faced legal consequences for their actions, and the rezoning application was unanimously rejected by the county board after the full story came to light. Martha's health actually improved once the stress of the custody battle was behind them. Her doctors attributed it to reduced anxiety and the continued positive influence of having purpose and companionship in her daily life. One sunny afternoon, as Elijah and Kepler were walking home from the library, they met Ms. Maxwell on the sidewalk. The social worker had testified honestly about her observations during the hearing, noting that while Martha's home wasn't luxurious, it provided a nurturing and intellectually stimulating environment for Elijah. "Hello, Elijah," she greeted. him with a genuine smile. "How are you and your grandmother doing?" "We're doing very well, thank you," Elijah replied politely. "Grandma's garden is thriving, and I just got accepted to a summer astronomy program at the university." Miss Maxwell nodded approvingly. "I'm glad to hear it. You know, in my years as a social worker, I've learned that family isn't always about perfect circumstances or material advantages. It's about love, respect, and belonging." She glanced down at Kepler, who was watching her with his intelligent amber eyes. "And sometimes family includes four-legged members too." Elijah smiled. "Kepler is definitely family. He's saved us more than once." As they continued home, Elijah reflected on everything that had happened. His uncle had seen him only as a means to an end, a tool to leverage for financial gain. But through the ordeal, Elijah had discovered strengths within himself that he hadn't known existed. He'd always been confident in his intellectual abilities, but now he recognized his capacity for courage, determination, and strategic thinking in the face of adversity. When they reached the hilltop house, Martha was waiting on the porch, waving to them. The evening sunlight bathed the old timber home in a warm golden glow, making it look like something from a painting, modest but beautiful, imperfect but precious. "Look what came in the mail," Martha called, holding up an official-looking letter. "The Historical Society has approved our application. The house is now officially designated as a historic landmark. No one can ever tear it down or develop this land." Elijah broke into a run, Kepler bounding joyfully beside him. As they reached the porch steps, the golden retriever barked once, a sound that seemed almost like a cheer of celebration. Martha enveloped Elijah in a hug. "We did it, sweetheart." "We saved our home. We did it together," Elijah corrected, including Kepler in their embrace. "All three of us." From their hilltop vantage point, they could see the entire valley stretched out before them. The town where generations of walkers had lived, the abandoned railroad tracks that now served as walking paths, and the distant mountains that changed colors with the seasons. This was more than just property or real estate. It was their anchor in the world, their place of belonging. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Elijah pointed out constellations to his grandmother, explaining the ancient myths behind their names and the scientific realities of their composition. Kepler sat attentively between them, his golden fur catching the last rays of sunlight. In that peaceful moment, with the people he loved most beside him, Elijah knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not because it was perfect, but because it was home. Dear listeners, we hope you've been moved by this journey with Elijah, Martha, and faithful Kepler. Stories like these remind us that family bonds can overcome even the most challenging obstacles. If you enjoyed this emotional tale, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating stories that explore the extraordinary capacities of the human spirit. Find it by clicking to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if Elijah's brilliance and determination touched your heart. We bring unique stories like this one every day, each exploring the complexity and beauty of life's unexpected challenges. What was your favorite moment? And from Elijah's journey, we're waiting to hear from you in the comments below.